it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. My sister disappeared into the forest last year, and I'm going to find out what happened if it kills me. Part 1. My little sister Emily was always more adventurous than I was. She's 4 years younger than me, and even when we were kids, she'd be the one climbing to the top of the tallest trees, wading through dark tunnels to follow streams, balancing across pipes over rushing water, or trying to catch sheep up on the common. Always laughing, while I stood behind or below her, shouting for her to stop, come back, that she was going to hurt herself. Well, that's just how things were. Em, the daredevil, me desperately trying to keep up. Borderline feral Emily, and stick in the mud Anna. Oh, I never minded. She was my baby sister. It was my job to look after her. And I loved her. Last summer she announced she and her fiancé Jim were heading off to America, with some friends she'd met in university. They were going to stay at some isolated cabin in the middle of the wilderness. A big gang of them getting wasted and doing crazy shit literally hours away from anyone who could help. As you might imagine, I was not best pleased. Well, I could get some time off. Come out there with you, I said, keeping my voice as light as possible. She just laughed. We're going to be drinking and hanging out in the woods with a load of strangers, she said, in that lovingly mocking way that she had. You'd hate it. And she was right. There's no way I could realistically push the subject, and if she worked out the real reason I was suggesting, she'd see me as exactly the sort of overprotective paranoiac I'd always tried to deny being. And so I didn't go. I told myself I was making a fuss out of nothing anyway. Jim was a sensible guy. She was an adult. It'd be fine. I mean, bad things only happen to other people, right? When word came through that she was missing, my parents didn't seem too concerned at first. I don't mean that in a bad way. They just felt the same way I did. That bad things don't happen to us. Because, well, we're us. You hear about people vanishing in the news, but it doesn't happen to anyone you know. And we boarded the Heathrow to Bangor main flight, fully expecting her to have been found by the time we landed. Then we could all scream at her, have a holiday, and come home. When the police met us at the airport, that changed. It wasn't only Emily missing, or even just her and Jim. Everyone she was with had vanished. Almost a dozen 20-somethings had driven out into the woods one day, and that was that, just gone. We all went out to the cabin, using it as a base for our search, all the families together. God, it was eerie. Reminded me of the Marie Celeste, or that Elon Moore lighthouse thing. Cupboards full of food, all their stuff laid out like they just popped out. But they were gone. Well, everyone was really enthusiastic at first, piling into the woods, confident a group that size couldn't be missing for very long. And we'd find them, of course we would. It'd all be a story to laugh at one day. Week by week, people drifted away until finally everyone admitted defeat. They were just gone. Missing. Presumed dead, but honestly, who could say? Maybe they were in shallow graves, maybe they'd been kidnapped, maybe they'd been abducted by frickin' aliens. The point was, nobody knew and nobody seemed to want to know. Not by then. By then everyone just wanted to move on as best they could. I was livid, but what could I do? The cabin belonged to Emily's friend's family and it was private property. Once we were told to leave, that was it. We flew home without her. It broke my heart. She was my baby sister. I hadn't been there to protect her. And I was expected just to give up? Oh, fuck that. I always intended on going back, but what happened last week sealed the deal. While looking through a box of Emily's stuff, I found a notebook. And on the last page, she'd scribbled the login details for websites she used, Reddit among them, or this account. And then I read her posts. I can't tell if something unimaginably awful happened to her, or if she just had a complete psychotic break. I'd write it all off as insanity if it wasn't for my grandfather's old stories. My however many great-grandfather before once helped out Gwyn ap Nudd, King of Annan himself. Now this chap had a very attractive daughter who came up pregnant very soon after Gwyn's visit. Well, that and something Grandad had always said about it. Kind knows kind. That's why I came to take a month off work, book a flight out to America and hire a 4x4 to get me back out to the cabin. I had to stop in town to pick up some essentials on the way, trying not to draw any attention to myself. Everything was going great until my month's worth of supplies exploded out of the bags as I crossed the postage stamp car park. I was hastily lobbing armfuls of stuff into the boot when I realized someone had stopped to help me. I looked up to thank him, flustered, and froze. He chuckled at the look on my face. "Nice to see you again, Anna," he said, pleasantly enough. "Oh, fuck," I said, because I knew the guy. I spent a lot of time with him last year. He was Bas Tovey, cousin of Cassie, Emily's best friend, who'd also gone missing. We'd gotten on quite well, and so yeah, he recognized me. We stood up, dumping the last of the groceries away, and I slammed the boot, trying to avoid meeting his eyes. He leaned against the back of the car, eyebrows raised, watching me. I glared back, determined not to speak first. Unfortunately, I have a will of cardboard. "Look, it's not what you think." He snorted. "Oh, you're just back for the nightlife, huh? Maybe I was coming to see you. Even though the last you knew I was still living in Norwalk." "That's a point. Why are you here?" He shrugged. "Got a place in town in the spring. Just wanted to be near them, you know." "Oh, maybe that's why I'm here," I said quietly. He laughed again. Let me give you some advice, Anna," he said, leaning in and lowering his voice. "Go home. Going out to that place, especially alone, is suicide. My grandfather, people who live around here, they'd all tell you the same thing. That forest isn't right. Now, last year was unusual, but my family have lost people out there practically once a generation since they've owned the damn place. People who've been out there, well, they've seen things." "What sort of things?" "People off in the distance who disappear when you get near them. Things that look like animals but aren't. Things that look like people but aren't. And that's not counting all the noises. But please, I'm begging you, go home." I shivered slightly, but shook my head. "I can't," I said, meaning it. "Look, I just can't do another Christmas without her. I just can't." He sighed, squeezing the bridge of his nose. Eventually he said, "Fine, stay here, but don't go out to the cabin. You stay with me, and we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. Deal?" I agreed, making a great show of my reluctance, and he told me to wait with the car while he picked up a few things so I could follow him home. As soon as he was out of sight, I hopped in the Jeep and headed straight out to the cabin. So sue me. I didn't fly all the way out here to sit in his house listening to regurgitated ghost stories. I came out here to see if there's anything in that cabin to tell me what happened to my sister. The drive out was moderately difficult, but uneventful. Before too long, I was parked outside the cabin itself, which looked just as I remembered it, though with decidedly fewer people milling around. Once I switched the engine off, it was quiet out there. Not the eerie silence you might be imagining, just the peace and stillness of the forest. It felt sort of welcoming, actually, like it was glad to see me back. I didn't try the house straight away, instead heading for the ring of stones separating the slightly overgrown lawn from the forest beyond. I'd never really looked at the stones before. They were rounded and seemed to be buried a little way into the ground, covered in lichens and moss. They also had some very faded marks on them, most of which I couldn't make out. The ones I could see were mostly Celtic-esque ruins, I think. I was so focused on them, I didn't notice the engine at first. And when I eventually realized what I was hearing, they were practically the cabin, too late to do anything. Not that there was much I could do anyway, like I was going to floor it out of there and drive whoever it was off the road. That would go over really well with the police, I'm sure. It turned out it was just Bas. He stopped his pickup truck just behind my rental, barely even spared me a glance as he hefted his own grocery bag and headed inside. I stared after him for a second, bewildered, waiting for the yelling to start. I thought maybe he'd gone in to grab his gun or something. When I peeked through the door, though, he was just unpacking tins. He again barely looked at me as I went to stand next to him. "So, you're not angry?" pretty fucking angry," he said. "But what good will yelling do? If I haul you back to town, you'll just end up back here as soon as my back's turned. Well, at least if I'm out here with you." He shrugged and went on unpacking. "Well, thank you. You do everything I say exactly as I say. No hesitation, no argument, no stupid questions. I know stuff about this place you don't, so that's my deal. You want to stay out here? Fine. But you follow my rules, agreed?" He held his hand out. I smiled and shook it, then handed him my phone, open to M's first post. You, should probably read this," I said before leaving to get the rest of the stuff from the car. Crashed out on the sofa before I could hear what Bass thought about Emily's story. I guess thanks to jet lag. I jolted awake sometime in the early hours, and for a second had no idea who I was, where I was, or why I was. And then it all came back to me, and with it 2 realizations. 1, Bass had given me a pillow and blanket as I'd slept, and 2, something was shrieking outside. Specifically, I think it was shrieking my name. I was headed for the door before I could reconsider, half convinced I was going to barrel out there into a gang of inbred backwoods creeps, kick some ass, and thereby rescue Emily single-handed. Instead, as I reached for the door handle, a hand closed on my wrist. I let out a squeak before I realized it was just Bass. "Okay, go back to bed." "You can hear it too, can't you? Who are they? How do they know my name?" "Go back to bed." I stared him down. Well, tried to anyway. I failed. I pulled my hand free, briefly considered making a break for the back door, but instead stropped my way back to the couch. I'd barely sat down before Bass wrenched open the door and bellowed something into the night. I don't know what the fuck he said. It wasn't English or Welsh, that's all I can say for sure. But it did the trick. There was a final, trailing shriek, something like hysterical laughter, and then nothing. First, an eerie, dead silence, and then the normal sounds of the night crept back in. Bass waited a moment, then shut and locked the door before heading back upstairs. I whispered his name, but he didn't pause, and I didn't want to push him. Well, I didn't get much sleep after that. I'm actually starting to think I might have made a miscalculation. That being said, I came out here to find out the truth about what happened to Emily, and I'm not going home until I've done that. No matter what. Part 2. Well, I believe everything now, at least. No more of that, was it real or was it a breakdown, Agent Scully shit? I've just gone full Mulder. Jeez. Bass has been point-blank refusing to discuss anything I've heard at night, as well as virtually keeping me on house arrest since we've been here. He did make French toast for breakfast this morning, though, so that's something. After the dishes were washed, I made my proposal for the day. He didn't even bother to reply, he just looked at me. "I literally just want to take a walk in the woods," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "It's not like I haven't been out there before." "Yeah, but not alone." "But I won't be alone, will I? I'll be with you." He shook his head, gesturing to my phone. "You read the same thing I read, yeah? The whole thing? And yet you still came out here and decided you wanted to go poking around in the woods and chasing strange noises at night?" "Well, when you put it like that," I huffed, waving this off. "Look, I came out here to..." "Yeah, find out what really happened, yeah, whatever." He just stared at me for an unsettlingly long time. I saw it on his face when he gave in. I couldn't help grinning. Looking back, I hope it looked more grateful than smug, actually. Either way, we headed out early. He stopped me before I could cross the stones and asked me again if I was sure. When I said I was, he told me to kiss the fingers on my right hand, then lay my hand flat on the stone for a few seconds. I did so without arguing or questioning, as promised, though I now had many, many new questions, and off we went. I'd like to tell you I felt a sense of foreboding or creeping dread or something, but nope, Honestly, it started off as quite a pleasant stroll in the woods, if a bit cold. We'd been going for a while, when I thought to ask him how he seemed to know so much more about the place than his cousins. "Oh, me and Mikey, my brother, we've always been closer to our grandpa," he said, after a bit of prodding. "My uncle had a falling out with Grandpa when Kid and Cassie were still kids, so they only saw him occasionally growing up. My dad was always his favorite, I guess, and we grew up on the same street as him. He said what he knew about this place he learned from his father, who learned it from his father, and on and on." "So, go on then. What's meant to be out here?" "Look, we're not meant to talk about it, especially not when we're out here." "Bass, come on." He looked at me and sighed. "He said the Tovey who first built out here had a whole mess of kids. One day, one of his younger sons ended up going missing. Everyone was out searching for him, but this guy was on his own when he found this, henge, I guess. Huge circle of standing stones, not like the ones at the house, real big ones. As he was standing there, wondering how he'd never known they were on his property, something came out of the stones." "What?" "Something. Man, I don't know. That's just how the story goes. Anyway, it came out and told the guy he was keeping the kid, but that so long as they respected the land, he and the rest of his family could keep living out here. He would even keep them safe from anyone who posed a threat to them, into the bargain. It even gave him ways of dealing with its family if they ever caused a problem. We just had to stick to the deal." Well, I'd imagine running over one of his mutant babies and eating its slow-roasted flesh probably wasn't sticking to the deal. Probably not, no. Now, I'll admit, up until this point, I was still torn about believing any of it. I got even further from belief when, as if on cue, I started hearing a woman sobbing quietly in the bushes ahead of us, slightly off to the left. There was actually a tiny part of me, though, that was so convinced it was Emily, it felt like my heart might blow right out of my ribs. But no, I know what Emily crying sounds like, and this wasn't it. Bass's hand closed on my elbow, painfully tight, and he yanked me to a halt. When I turned to look at him, he put a finger to his lips. His eyes had gone huge, practically bugging out of his head. Then, still shushing me, he gently but firmly tried to pull me back the way we'd come. At that point, I made a quick, admittedly fairly stupid decision. I pulled my arm free and sprinted off in the direction of the sobbing. Don't ask me why I did it. I think the part of me that didn't believe thought he was trying to trick me into going back to town. You know the thing. Take me out in the woods, tell me a scary story, have someone make some timely spooky noises, then use it to convince me to leave. I thought if I could move quickly enough, I could catch his friend out. So, I was feeling pretty confident, and primed to start shouting, when I burst through the last few sets of branches to find a woman crouched down, facing away from me as she sobbed so hard her whole body shook with the effort. The shouts dried up in my throat as I realized the woman was stark naked and absolutely filthy, with bones which were clearly visible through her skin. Her hair was a ragged, matted clump, and where her hands clasped her back I could see her fingernails were black and about 2 inches long, tapering to a point. Honestly, my first thought that we'd stumbled across some escapee from some psych ward, living in the woods, keeping people as pets. That thought died pretty quickly. As soon as I saw her properly, she stopped sobbing and went utterly still. She stood up slowly, so slowly I could hear her joints crackle in the silence, and as I heard it, I realized it was suddenly silent. No critters, no birds, not even the wind in the trees. Just dead silence, except for my ragged breathing and the little click in my throat as I gulped. I started trying to back away, feeling colder than ever. Well, I knew I'd fucked up by then. That feeling of foreboding I'd been missing earlier hit me like a tsunami, bringing with it the sort of strangling panic I hadn't felt since seeing that police escort waiting for us in the airport last year. Don't know if I made too much noise backing up or what, but she suddenly started jittering in place, like she was having a seizure. I froze again. then... Anna! I broke out in goosebumps, because any doubt I'd had about her being human vanished when she spoke. Sometimes my dog sounds like he's trying to form actual words, and that's what this was like. It said my name, but it was like picking the relevant noises out of an animal call. It kept trying, each time sounding a little bit clearer. And then it started turning around. I was frozen to the spot, more likely to collapse, throw up, or both and make a run for it. Just then, strong arms closed around my ribs from behind and hauled me backwards. I yelled, but before I could start fighting, I heard Bass muttering, "Oh, fuck," and then realized it was just him, that he'd come after me. He turned around a few feet away, set me down, and gripped my hand as we started sprinting back to the cabin. He didn't turn us around quite fast enough, though, so I still ended up getting the barest glimpse of its face. Now, obviously, I can't be sure. I was off my head with terror, and we were moving pretty quickly. But I think its face looked wrong, like a smeared oil painting. Anyway, we were sprinting along, far too fast for the conditions. My face is cut to ribbons from taking too many branches to it. But I couldn't hear any movement behind us, at least. I thought we might be in the clear. Only then I started hearing the ringing, like a tuning fork had been struck. It was like tinnitus. I think Emily described it pretty well, the sort of sound you feel in your back teeth. Bass must have heard it too, because he picked up the pace, until the point I was practically flying along behind him like a kite. The sound was growing, though, not steadily. It faded in and out like a radio with rubbish reception for a while. But as we, mainly me, started getting worn out and slowing down, it started getting louder and more painful. I was pretty much spent, incapable of keeping going at that pace any longer. I gasped out Bass's name, trying to tell him to leave me and save himself. He stopped so suddenly my noodle legs sent me stumbling into his back. He didn't pause, but turned straight around, grabbed my right wrist and slapped my hand over my eyes, the hand I'd pressed to the stones earlier. The tinnitus just stopped immediately. I just stood there, gulping down air, waiting for something awful to happen. It didn't. Bass! Here. His giant manly paw slipped into my free left hand and squeezed reassuringly. Whatever you do, keep your eyes closed. Keep your hand over your eyes and don't react to anything. Bass, I'm freaking out. You'll be fine. He tugged my hand gently. Right, come on. How do you know we're going the right way? Look, just trust me. Come on. Well, I shuffled along after him, not seeing many other options. My hand was clamped so tightly over my face it's a wonder I didn't burst my eyeballs. That walk was most likely the worst thing I've ever done. Bass kept hold of my free hand, gripping tight enough to bruise, and seemed surprisingly confident in leading me. That started making me paranoid after a while, though. What if it wasn't actually him? What if something had killed him while my eyes had been closed, and now one of those smiling things was leading me off a cliff, or into a cave, or worse? That's when I realized we were surrounded by voices. The thoughts I was having weren't actually my own thoughts. They were whispers in the air around me, so quiet and insidious it felt like they were coming from inside my own head. "Open your eyes," they said. At the same time I realized I could feel things trailing lightly over my shoulders, my face plucking at the hand over my eyes. Well, it could have been leaves, or cobwebs, or, well, something else. "Open your eyes to be sure. Look at us, Anna. Open your eyes. Come and see." And God help me, I wanted to. I wanted to be sure it really was Bass holding my hand. I wanted to be sure we were still in the forest. I wanted to see what the fuck was touching me. I dug my nails into my face, pressed the heel of my hand into my eye socket, and bit back the whispers that were crying to get out. And that's when I heard it. The other voices had been distant, wispy, nebulous things, like the wind or a song stuck in your head. But this was recognizably human. This was a voice I knew as well as my own. It sounded surprised and delighted as it called my name, and I knew who it was immediately. Emily. I ripped my hand away from my eyes instantly, turning towards her voice. There was no one there. Bass and I were stood on the lawn of the cabin, and it was late afternoon, almost dark. Somehow, it was almost dark. When I looked harder at the trees, I thought I saw a few branches swaying lightly. But Bass squeezed my hand then, bringing my attention back to him. God, it's true, I said in a very high-pitched voice. Isn't it? It's all true. Bass just snorted. Well, duh. Part 3. Well, I started today ready to rip someone's face off, and I'm ending it pretty depressed, actually. No, strike that. I started today bathed in terror sweat. See, I've been having nightmares since last year, which is understandable, I think. Since I've been back out here, well, it's just gotten worse. And last night took the biscuit. Oh, it was one of those horribly realistic ones, too. I woke up, went downstairs, and sat in front of the fire with Bass, sipping coffee. I noticed an especially long hair sticking out of my arm, which I thought was terribly embarrassing. So I tried to pluck it. Well, the hair came out, and out, and out, until I was holding about 6 inches of what I suddenly realized was stitching. And then my entire forearm split open lengthways. Blood gushed out onto the rug, one big sploosh, like a burst water balloon, and the flesh fell open like it was on hinges. I shrieked and tried forcing it closed, while Bass just watched impassively over his coffee mug. Then the skin of my hand slithered off like a loose glove and hit the coffee table with a sound I can only describe as a splort. That's when I realized there was no more blood coming out. I carefully braced my forearm, then let the flesh sag open again, just enough to get a look inside. Should have been bare bone in there, but it wasn't. It was a dog leg, somehow dry and perfectly white. The human flesh was a cover which had been stitched over the top. The human hand was really a glove, and underneath it was a fully intact dog limb. As I stared at it, horrified and bewildered, the split continued unraveling up my arm, until I woke up screaming hysterically and clutching at my shoulder. It took me a second to stop freaking out, during which I gouged a few chunks out of my arm. I just started to calm down when Bass kicked my door open and hurtled in, yelling questions and waving a rifle around in a manner I can only describe as worrying. I eventually got him settled down. We spent the rest of the wee hours cutched up in my bed together, trying to ignore the continued shrieking outside. We got up around dawn, and that's when the shit hit the fan. See, the fact is that Emily's last post has been deleted, which is something I'd noticed and always found weird, especially since the post before it, well, it seems pretty conclusive. Her laptop was one of the things left here, and when we went home, we took it with us. None of us could bear touching it in the meantime, but I got to thinking and fired off a text to my cousin Angie, giving her a vague outline of what I was looking for. Well, she found 2 things of interest as it happens. One appears to be Emily's actual last post, and it's reasonably short, so I'll get that out of the way up front. If you're looking for explanations, I have none. If you're looking for a name, we don't have one. The people are old enough to remember a time when we were the only ones here. The elders share their knowledge. We see everything that was, is, and could be all at once. The trees show us. Be kind. Stay away. All the rest were Word doc versions of the post she'd ended up uploading, but this was just dumped in the notepad thing. Only then there was a full Word document following the last published post. This one more or less included M's note, but threw in a load of other stuff too. The Tovies coming out here and getting slaughtered en masse. The stones stopping working. Stuff that never happened. All written in a style as if someone was trying to imitate her. I had Angie check the date the post was last edited, and it felt like I'd been sucker punched. It was dated after the initial search party had come out here. Bass made the mistake of joining me on the couch as I read through what Angie had just sent me, and I turned to him straight away. "Are you the one that used Emily's laptop?" He froze, refusing to look at me. And that was all the answer I needed, really. "You knew about Emily's posts as far back as last year," I said slowly. "You all did, didn't you? You knew exactly what had happened, and you knew it was the truth, and you let us all search around out there. What could we have said? Fucking something, I don't know. What about the post? I mean, the last one?" "Well, Grandpa had Mikey write it, so, well, try and wrap it all up, discredit it, tell people to stay away. I don't know. Look, I swear, I had nothing to do with that bit, and You're a freaking liar," I spat, and stormed off outside. For a second, I thought I was going to drive right back to town, fuck everything, and just run. Next thing I know, I'm down by the nearest of the stones, with a pencil and paper, doing a rubbing of one of the symbols. Well, it did strike me as odd. I couldn't remember the moment I stopped wanting to get some space and decided to finally put my GCSE geography skills to use instead. Then I got slightly distracted. I mean, again, some more. The symbol I was looking at was a Valknut, as in the old Norse mark meant to be sacred to Odin. Only about 3 inches away from it was a Celtic one. Triquetra, I think they're called. Sort of a circle triangle. Look, I'm not an expert in this. So anyway, I looked harder, and it turns out they're all like it. At least all the ones I've checked are. Celtic stuff alongside Norse, alongside a lot of stuff I don't recognize, all mixed in together. I'd been out there for hours when Bass came over to join me. I'd mostly forgotten about being pissed off at him by then, and pointed out the weirdness of this. We just shrugged. "Oh, the stones were here before their house," he said. "If people made them, it was well before our time. The first Tovi moved them, so they made a boundary. They used to be spread out all over the land around here. Listen, Anna, I really didn't write that last post, but I'm the one that deleted it. Grandpa and Mike, they just wanted it to sound like some stupid story, so that's what they did. I kept thinking about it, and I just didn't feel right, lying about all of it, especially after I met you. I thought she was entitled to her last words, and I couldn't tell you about it, but you were entitled to read them, if you ever found them." I stood up, brushing lichen off my hands, and looked at him. He looked so forlorn, I just couldn't help myself. "All right. You're absolved on account of having saved my ass multiple times already. Hard to hold a grudge under the circumstances. Hey, any other big revelations you want to revelate while we're at it?" He was still giving me that look, and my heart dropped. Oh, jeez. What else? "I want you to be honest about something. Not just with me, with yourself too. Don't answer with what you think you should say. Actually think about it." "Okay. Why are you so dead set against going back to town?" I pulled a face, instantly wanting to snap something about Emily, but reluctantly did as he asked. "I suppose, even with everything, I feel comfortable here," I said slowly. It felt like the words were being dredged up from way down deep. When I first got back here, it felt more like coming home than actually going home did last year. Plus, every time I seriously think about leaving, I get this I want to say, feeling of superstitious dread. It's like how you feel bad if you smash a mirror or open an umbrella indoors. I know rationally that nothing bad will happen to me back in town. It'll be safer than here, any road. But I still feel sick whenever I think about it. It's like I can always find something else I'd rather be doing. He'd been staring at me the whole time with this look I couldn't quite place. I realized what it was then. Pity. A sort of deflated pity. And I felt a chill go down my spine. Oh, he's in my head, isn't he? Bass nodded. Oh, I could always just throw you in the truck and drive away, he said, though we both knew it wouldn't be that easy. I swallowed, my throat suddenly very dry. Well, when do you think it... Probably the first time you crossed the stones. I noticed it last year before you left, but wasn't trying so hard then. It didn't want to draw any more attention than it already had, especially after that diver vanished too, but... Yeah. Have you ever had to look back over a period of your life and wonder how much of it was real? Had to run back over a year's worth of making decisions and thinking thoughts and just hopping along, and then try to figure out how much of it was you and how much of it was something other, something which had wriggled into your mind without your noticing and gently but firmly steered you down a certain path? I let out a long breath, blinking back a sudden flood of tears, and gave a rather soggy laugh. I'm fucked then, aren't I? Well, like I said, I could always toss you in the truck. He trailed off, nothing more needing to be said. Whatever's out here had stopped Kit and Rice's escape. It had taken Jim and shepherded Emily back to the cabin. There's an awful lot of trees between here and civilization, and every single one could be hiding something behind it. Yeah, I'm sorry, Bass said, sounding like he meant it. I'd hoped to stop you in town. I should never have let you out of my sight. You moved up here to stop me doing this, didn't you? I said, the thought suddenly occurring to me. He nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. I had a few friends keeping an eye out for you too. I really am sorry. Don't be, I said, going up on tiptoes to give him a kiss on the cheek. I appreciate the effort. Now, well, it is what it is. It's good to know in a way. There's a certain stress that goes with hope. I have to keep trying. I have to keep fighting. I can't give up no matter what. Accepting that you're fucked no matter what you do is strangely liberating. Besides which, I've got one thing going for me. One thing he can't take from me. I started writing this so people would know what happened to Emily and the others, and so that if I never came back, if something happened to me, there'd be something to show for it all. And I'm going to make good on that. I'll be here to the bitter end. Part 4. Well, last night I slept better than I have for a while. Well, that's because I'd made peace with my eventual horrible demise, or because Bass and I had decided to bed share some more. Well, I couldn't say. Probably a little of both. The dream I had this morning, though, well, at least it wasn't as awful as the dog leg dream. In it, I was sat on a shingle beach, looking out over a small lake with an island in the center. A little boy was stood on a wooden jetty to my left, skipping stones, and he turned to look at me as if he suddenly realized I was there. He beamed and came sprinting over to throw himself on me in a hug, babbling in a language I didn't understand. I got him by the shoulders and led him away from me, and barely managed to keep from hurling him down the beach when I got a good look at him. I can't remember why now, or any details about him, only that there was something subtly wrong about him, something other, and he had Emily's eyes. And that's when I heard the voice behind me, her voice. He says you have to come home, she said, and the boy nodded eagerly. I refused to turn around, but heard the shingle crunching as she walked up to kneel down beside me. She put her chin on my shoulder to whisper in my ear, and at the same time the boy turned to point out the little island, which had started to glow so brightly I could barely even look at it. You have to come home, Anna. I jolted awake at that point, elbowing Bass in the throat as I did so. He didn't seem bothered. Went straight back to sleep, actually. I pushed myself upright and sat there for a while, trying to get my breath back. That's when I realized it was quiet outside. For the first night since I've been here. Just quiet, no screaming or howling, but no eerie stillness either. Then, so suddenly I almost wet the bed, something broke the quiet. I might not have spent a great deal of time around guns, but I've lived rurally enough to know what a gun sounds like. Someone was shooting outside, and the gunfire was quickly followed by desperate screams. Some very human screams. I tried shaking Bass awake, but he wasn't budging. I decided that was probably for the best, and then quickly dressed and headed outside. I didn't take the rifle with me, since I'd be more likely to break my jaw or my collarbone firing wildly at a raccoon or something. And yes, I know, I headed out into the forest alone and unarmed at night. Oh, my thoughts on the matter were that I was fucked no matter what, but that there were people out there who were still alive, who I might be able to help. I couldn't just sit in bed with my hands over my ears, could I? I scribbled a hasty note to Bass, grabbed a torch and headed out. Thankfully, I remembered to do the little ritual as I crossed the boundary, kissed my fingers, and patted the stone. Then I slipped out into the trees, turned the torch off, and listened. Surprising how far sound travels at night, even under the trees. I could hear a man's voice sobbing and cursing off to my right. Well, as disconcerting as that was, I still felt like I should try to help. I picked my way closer as quietly as I could, and in case it was one of those mimic things, I put my hand over the end of the torch. The intention was to make it duller, to keep it from giving me away. It actually just made the light all reddish and organic looking, and was generally as creepy as fuck. Anyway, it wasn't a mimic. It was just a young man, probably in his mid-20s. He had a shaved head, was wearing a huge plaid shirt, and was sobbing into the rifle he clutched to his chest, whimpering gibberish to himself. "Hello?" I said softly, stepping out into view. I took a quick look around, but we seemed to be the only two there, at least for the moment. The rifle was up and pointed at my chest in an instant, the guy's tear-stained face suddenly warping into an angry grimace. "Who the fuck are you?" he screamed. I could barely move. Have you ever had a gun pointed at you? One you're pretty sure would leave you with a cartoon-sized hole through your torso? I crept outside that night ready to deal with supernatural horrors, but now there was some random hysteric holding a gun on me. It's at the exact moment I realized that I might have made my peace with being kidnapped by some sort of wood spirit. But dying? Oh, not so much. "Listen, I have a cabin back there," I said quickly, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "I just heard something out here. I wanted to see if you were all right." "We were hunting," he said. His eyes were jerking about all over the place, like he couldn't bear to look directly at anything. "Me and the boys. I think it got 'em all. Oh, jeez, I think it got 'em all." With that, he went off into another screaming fit. Most of it was garbled gibberish, but I got enough to work out that he and his friends had decided to ignore all the local legends and come out to hunt and camp on Tovey land anyway. Then he'd gone to see his friends being horribly murdered, well, at least by the sounds of it. The last thing he said, though, was perfectly clear. "You're one of them. I can tell." "Oh, shit. No, I have a cabin over there." "You're not one of the frickin' Toveys," he snarled, and those rolling eyes had finally picked a spot to fix on. Me. Oh, great. He finished up with, "I recognize your voice. You bitch. You're that one that... Oh, God, Simon." Oh, what the hell have you done, Em? I thought, even as I hastily started trying to explain the situation. Lord knows what I would have said, mind you, especially since the guy was shrieking and wailing again by this point. He also brought up that rifle again, aiming it at my face this time, finger on the trigger. And then he was gone. For a second I thought that's literally what had happened, that he'd just straight up vanished into thin air. The gun went off somewhere in there, and I felt chips of bark rain down on my head from where the branch above me exploded into shrapnel. But there was no sign of the guy. And then came the screaming. The noises he'd been making before had been horrible enough, the sounds of a man losing his grip on reality. But this was worse. This was high-pitched and rabbity, and slightly damp, like there was something blocking his airway. And then came the other sounds, the ripping, the grinding, the chewing. He hadn't disappeared. He was in the bushes behind where he'd just been standing, and something had pulled him in. Well, I might have stood there all night, praying not to be noticed, if the chewing sounds hadn't stopped suddenly. The screams had turned into weak moans by now, and I heard something whisper, again in that gravelly dog yowl of a voice. Shh. A few seconds later it followed it up with, Hannah. The last syllable rising into an ear-splitting shriek, like a cat being tortured. And under it, I could hear the guy, screaming his thick, gurgling death screams again. Well, that was enough for me. I clapped the hand I'd touched to the stones over my eyes, hurled the torch at whatever was making the noise, fuck knows why, and sprinted back towards the cabin as quickly as I could. At least I finally knew how Bass had gotten us home that first visit to the woods. The cabin glowed like a beacon as soon as the hand was over my eyes, so brightly I could actually make out the silhouettes of the trees between me and it. Something started crashing through the trees behind me as I went, and I started letting out these big wimpy squeals, convinced there was no way I was going to be able to outrun whatever this was. But I did. I also caught my foot on one of the stones and went sprawling flat onto the grass, frog hopping the rest of the way to the cabin. To my relief, the lights were on. Bass must have been watching for me, since as soon as I crossed the stones, he was stood on the porch with his own rifle. What was all that? He yelled as I scrambled past him, not stopping until I'd practically crawled into the fireplace. You had a load of guys from town on your land, apparently, I gasped out. Keyword in that sentence is had. Bass quickly shut the door and locked it, coming to join me on the floor. You went out to see some townies? Where else was I going to go this time of night? Well, he opened his mouth to answer, looking down at the crumpled mess that was left of the note I'd left. The note including my dream about the lake and the island. I cocked my head. You thought I'd gone to the lake? The one that took the diver? The calm had started creeping over me by then, like a warm blanket. It seems being brain-fogged isn't all bad. We haven't been out to the lake since I've been here. Why? Oh, we're meant to avoid it, he said reluctantly. We can boat on the lake if we take some precautions, ask permission and such. But no one goes out to the island. I smiled. Well, that's where we're going next. The Tovies keep a boathouse on the lake shore, with a sweet little rowing boat and a kayak. Well, I loathe kayaks, so I was pretty glad when Bass started hauling the boat down the shingle. Bass wasn't glad about any of it. He was righteously pissed off as it happens. I can't blame him. He rowed us out there, finding a landing spot on the island. He looked apprehensively up at the bank as he hauled the oars in, making it blatantly clear he didn't want to do this in the least. I didn't blame him, but in that moment I made my decision. Okay, I said, standing up and slinging the rucksack we'd brought over my shoulders before he could grab it. I underestimated the weight of it and almost ended up toppling backwards into the water, which slightly ruined the extremely competent wilderness explorer effect that I was going for, but such is life. You stay here until this evening. If I'm not back by then, go back to the cabin for the night and head straight into town in the morning. What? He grabbed my arm as I started climbing out of the boat, almost dumping me in the water in the process. No, Anna. Look, We aren't doing anything, I said, still trying to be all debonair in that, but the look on his face made me feel awful. I sat back down, taking his hands. Bass, listen, I don't know if I'm coming back from this. I can't know if this is a choice I'm making or if that's what they want me to do. But I have to do it. I can't explain it, but I do. I think it's why I came back here. But I'm not going to drag you up there too. I want you to wait as long as it's safe. And if I don't come back, you're going to go home, call the police, and forget all about me, okay? Oh, he was not pleased. He started yelling about how the whole trip was just one big elaborate suicide attempt. How I was deliberately acting like the dumbass white woman in a horror movie. How I was so desperate for attention, I had to get it from a monster in the woods. Well, I just sat there and let him rant away because he clearly needed it. When he finally ran out of steam, I just smiled and said, "Well, I'm still going, and you're still staying here." He swore loud enough that it echoed all across the lake. But he'd given in, I could tell. Because he knows, same as me, there's no easy way out here for me. And even if I physically make it back to town, well, if it's going to get me one way or another, might as well see what this island is all about before I go, right? Well, on impulse, I decided to kiss Bass before I handed the phone over. He's standing there now, looking adorably surprised. I might give him another one before I head off into the land where Tovies fear to tread. And, just in case, thanks for listening so far. It's given me something other than constant existential dread to focus on. Just remember, stay safe. Part 5. Well, I lived, and I've got a lot to tell you. Because I'm in hospital and I've got nothing better to do. Well, just to let you know, things are about to get very, very weird. Anyway, so I headed off into the little wood that covered the island, all hiking gear and rucksack, which contained a first aid kit, packed lunch and water bottle, chocolate bars for energy, plus one of those brilliant tinfoil blankets they use to make people in shock look like roast chickens. The walk was pretty much perfect to begin with. Even ground, not too rocky. No dense underbrush or anything. There was a nice clear path. The surrounding trees kept the worst of the wind out, and the overhead cover let through enough sunlight to create that really nice dappled effect. Well, I don't own a watch, and Bass had my phone, so I didn't have any way of keeping track of time. Still, I'd taken a good look at the island as we paddled up, and I thought it'd take me maybe 20 minutes to walk the length of it. I also started counting off the seconds as I went, which wasn't perfect, but at least gave me an idea of how long I'd been out there. Around the third hour of walking in a straight line, I decided to take a break. I wasn't hungry enough for lunch yet, and I felt surprisingly well rested, but I still felt like having a sit down and a snack in the sunshine. The sun was directly overhead at this point, which seemed to confirm my suspicions over how long I'd been going for. I could have walked a full lap of the lake itself in 3 hours. As I sat there, mulling this over and munching on a Mounds bar, which it turns out is like a dark chocolate bounty, made me feel quite homesick. I heard the flutter of wings above me. I looked up to see the first non-me living thing I'd seen on the island, which happened to be a very large raven. It peered down at me with beady eyes, head cocked to the side. "Want some?" I asked it, holding the bar up for it to see. It clacked its beak, which I took as a yes, so I broke off a little chunk and chucked it a few feet away. The raven flew down and gobbled it up, and since I wasn't exactly starving, and since it felt nice having something alive and reasonably normal around, I broke the rest of the bar into little pieces and tossed them over to it. Once it was all gone, I tucked the wrapper into a side pocket of my bag and took a swig of water. "Well, all gone, little man," I said, showing it my empty hands. "Hope you enjoyed it." The raven cocked its head at me, clacked its beak, and then said, in perfectly understandable human tones, "Welcome home, Anna." And then it flew off down the path. "Oh, cheers, you creepy little fuck," I called after it, and I think I heard something laughing in the distance. Who knows at that point? I kept walking after that, counting out another 3 hours or so. This time I didn't have the benefit of the sun backing me up. It was still fixed overhead, not budging the whole time. That bright noonday light filtering down somehow made it feel even worse when I started finding the stones and bones. There were rocks lining the path at this point, similar to the markers at the cabin, though these looked older and more worn. The markings on them, on the other hand, looked so fresh they might have been done yesterday. It was easier to see what I'd noticed on the ones at the cabin here. Spirals, Valknuts, and Orkham all sat side by side with Norse runes and Triskelions, triquetras, pentagrams, plus a whole lot of other pictograms and sigils I didn't recognize. These rocks looked like they might fall apart at any moment under the sheer mass of carvings. And hanging from the trees above the stones were strings laden with all manner of things, from beads and feathers to what looked like human scalps, carved antlers and horns, pebbles with holes bored through them, figures woven from hair and fur and nails, sticks carved with symbols, and bones, plenty of bones. Everything from digits to long bones to skulls, from anything you can imagine. There were plenty of human skulls present too. Most of these had also been carved. I would probably have been freaking out at this point, but again it was like a blanket of calm had been wrapped around me. Have you ever been in this sort of shock where you can feel panic and hysteria bubbling away just below the surface, but overlaying this is a veneer of perfect calm, keeping the hysteria locked tightly away? Well, it was like that. Like someone had wrapped one of those tinfoil shock blankets around my mind. My mind looked like a roast chicken. I was so busy inspecting one particularly interesting human skull, this one had multiple gold teeth, that I didn't notice I'd left the path, stepping over a boundary stone so I could look at the skull from the other side without touching it. I also didn't notice the sheer drop until I was already mid-air, though I'd have sworn the ground was perfectly solid a second before. I landed heavily on my hands and knees, the rucksack flying forwards to slam my face into the ground. Only it didn't hit the ground. I ended up headbutting another skull, which cracked under the force, driving shards of old bone into my forehead. I sat back with a whimpered cry, reaching up to pluck the splinters out, which is when I realized my hands had also been punctured here and there. Judging by the pain in my legs, they were in the same state. I slowly looked down, and then I just as slowly got to my feet, swallowing down all the hysterical shrieks that were trying to come out. It was a pit. Maybe quite a deep one, I don't know. By the time I got there, it had been filled with so many bones they formed a dense enough framework that I could walk across them. The pit stretched away into an impossible distance on either side of me, though the distance from me to the far bank was only about 40 feet. It was like standing in a river of bones. Just staring at the way my blood was dripping through the gaps between the bones. Except I heard a croak above my head. I looked up, noticing the branches overhead here were more densely woven, and were all leafless, bleached and dead. Sitting on this latticework was the raven. It cocked his head at me, and in that unsettlingly human voice it said, "Should probably stick to the path." It had a point. I started for the other side then, bones crunching and clicking beneath me, while overhead the branches rattled and rasped as the raven hopped along, keeping pace. I kept my gaze on the far bank, and was actually starting to relax a bit when I heard that voice from overhead again. Uh-oh. I was looking behind me, back to where my blood was still trickling. I looked too, wondering what the problem was. Then a section of the bones rose up slightly, right where my blood was. There was a second where nothing happened, before another section rose, this one slightly closer to me. I think the raven told me to run, but it needn't have bothered. I was away by that point. I hit the far bank and started scrambling up its sheer face, glad the earth was the right consistency for me to get my hands and feet into it, to clamber my way back to solid ground. I had my chest over the edge, when something grabbed both my ankles and tried to haul me back down. I clung on, kicking wildly, and felt something graze my calf. Then whatever it was let go, and I finally made it over the edge, rolling away until I fetched up against a tree, gasping for breath. The raven croaked and flew on. Once I had my breath back, I checked my leg, which had a slight graze on it, a few beads of blood here and there. My ankles ached though, and there was a large chunk torn out of my trousers. I managed to limp on another 100 meters or so before I had to stop. I ate my lunch after a while, again sharing it with my creepy new friend. "So, what's up ahead?" I asked. "The whole world," it said, before flying back off the way he'd come. Well, very fucking helpful, I yelled after it. From there, the ground started to rise, the trees thinning out. What had been a perfectly straight path now started to wind in a spiral around a fairly steep hill. I might have been able to make a shortcut up it, but the markers were still bordering the path here, and I had learned my lesson about crossing them. So I walked, the sun directly overhead all the way, around and around, until eventually I came to the top. My mouth dropped open, and I couldn't do anything but stare. It was a stone circle, maybe even the one that long ago Tovey found while looking for his son. But honestly, stone circle doesn't do it justice. Each stone was at least 10 stories tall, with some even larger, and some laid across the tops of others. And there were so many of them, too many to count. The henge might have been the whole world. Every one was covered in the same symbols I'd seen over and over on my way up here. Only here the carvings were so deep I could have climbed inside. On impulse, I kissed my fingers and touched them to the nearest stone. Then I started pacing the edge, always staying outside the circle, trying to get a sense of the scale of the whole thing. I'd walked past 4 stones when I heard the voice in my head, the one that spoke a language I didn't understand, but which I understood perfectly all the same. "Welcome home, beloved," it said. Something was coming towards me from the center of the circle. It was tall, maybe twice my height, with antlers so huge it made it seem even taller. Despite that, and despite the thick covering of mouse-brown fur, it walked on 2 legs. I couldn't make out more details than that, though, although it couldn't have been too far away from me. It looked like it was. It was as if the distance inside the circle didn't actually fit the already massive circumference of the thing. I shook my head, and just like that I was angry. Really angry. Angrier than I've been in my life. I yelled at it, not in the hysterical way I've been doing since I came out here either, but commanding, authoritative, with my back straight and my head held high. "You're speaking to the heir of Gwynab, King of Annan, and the Tolworth Teg, leader of the Wild Hunt. I have the blood of royalty in my veins. My bones were hewn from the mountains, and my soul is poetry and song. I'm a part of my land, and my land is a part of me. And how dare you draw me here and try to make it otherwise? You might have claimed my sister, but you will not have me." Well, I'd like to say all that came to me in a sudden flash of insight, like maybe Gwyn himself was guiding me or something. Really, I was just channeling Game of Thrones super hard. Well, it didn't matter anyway. The thing just let out a chuckle that shook the stones and said, "We'll see." A cheeky bastard. "Wait," it added, as if it knew what I was thinking. Sheer by this point, it's pretty much a certainty that it did know, right? Whatever, I've never been one for being told what to do. And just as it came close enough for me to see its eyes, its luminous, fog-grey eyes, I slapped the hand I pressed to the stone over my eyes, took a deep breath, and leapt backwards off the hill. There was the echo of a roar in the air around me, and my ears popped so hard I screamed. It felt like I was falling for years, and I was sure I was a goner. Then I landed on my back so hard it drove all the air out of my chest. I lay there, struggling to catch my breath, and risked a look around. I was back at the little beach Bass had left me on. "What the actual fuck?" I wheezed, sitting up slowly. I noticed the raven, that same bloody giant raven, watching me from the trees, and I yelled up at it. "Are you going to tell me what happened?" The raven let out what sounded like a deep laugh, before taking off across the lake. "Yeah, thought not," I muttered. I struggled back to my feet and looked around for any sign of Bass, massaging the spot over my right kidney where my water bottle had dug in on the landing. The sun said it was still noon, but there was no sign of him. There was just the bloody kayak and the paddle. I cursed him the whole awful paddle back to shore. Well, actually, I cursed him the whole way back to the cabin, though that's when I started to worry. He was nowhere in sight, and neither was his truck, but the front door was unlocked. I rushed inside, yelling his name, but there was nothing, just silence. I shrugged off the rucksack and went sprinting around the house like a headless chicken, trying to work out what could have happened to him in the last 3 hours. I'm ashamed to say, I was on my 3rd lap of the house before I realized my phone was on the kitchen counter. I switched it on and called his mobile immediately, praying he'd pick up. When I heard that cautious but unmistakably him, "Hello," I could have cried with relief. "Why did you ditch me on the island, asshole?" I said, softening it with a relieved chuckle. He gasped. "Anna, is that really you?" "Well, yeah," I said, starting to feel slightly creeped out. "Bass, where the hell have you gone? You couldn't even wait a few hours for me." "Anna, I waited. I stayed there for days waiting. You didn't come back, so I thought, well, I filed a missing persons report and... Where were you?" "I've just been on the island where you left me. Why? How long have I been gone?" "Where are you now?" "Oh, I'm at the cabin. How long have I been gone, Bass?" "I'm coming out there to pick you up. Don't move." And with that, he hung up. I had some idea about how long it'd take him to get out there, so I went to sit in front of the cold, empty fireplace and just stared into it, wondering what I was going to tell him. What was I going to tell the police, for that matter? Well, I think I nodded off somewhere in there. The next thing I knew, the door had been thrown off its hinges, sliding all the way across the cabin before it fell over. And standing there, in the suddenly open doorway, beaming at me, was my baby sister. I'd finally found Emily. Part 6. Well, it wasn't exactly the touching family reunion I was hoping for, seeing as she'd just kicked the front door across the room. Still, she gave me her usual winning Emily smile, then held her arms out to me for a hug, and I was more than happy to give her one. That was at least until I took 3 steps towards her, and I realized I recognized what she was wearing. It was torn and bloodied and far too big for her, and that's because it was what the guy who tried to shoot me the other night was wearing. She was stood there, smiling just like she always used to, wearing a dead man's clothes. And just like that, I saw her. Really saw her, I mean. Saw the black fingernails 2 inches long and sharpened to fierce points. Saw the glow behind the blue of her eyes. Saw her teeth. I took one real hard look at her, and in that moment I realized what I should have known all along. She was really gone. Whatever I was looking at might be what's left of her now, but it wasn't my baby sister. Em was gone. Her forehead started creasing slightly, a big dopey grin becoming a little strained as she noticed my hesitation. I considered making a break for the back door, but I could hear those yowling voices calling to each other out there, penning me in, leaving me no choice but to go to Emily. I did have a choice, though, and I made it. I'm not saying it was a good choice. I turned and sprinted up the stairs, locking myself in the master bedroom. Then I dragged the dressing table in front of the door, barricading myself in. Emily was barely a second behind me, and the door bounced in its frame as she hit it, yowling. I backed away to the far side of the room, shivering, fully expecting her to start forcing her way through. Instead, she quietly called my name, in a perfectly human voice. "Let me in, Anne," she said. "I just want to talk to you. I just want a hug. Please, I've missed you." I wanted to put my hands over my ears, but I had a horrible suspicion I'd keep hearing her anyway. I don't think I could have handled that. Instead, I yelled for her to go away, which just made her chuckle. But you came all the way out here to see me, didn't you? There was a teasing tone to her voice, one that said she knew the real reason I was there. Please, I whispered, nearly in tears. Please just let me go home. She paused for so long I thought she might have actually left. Well, that's what you don't get, she said gently. This is home, Anna. It always was. Here, on the island. It's what we were always looking for when we were kids. Every time we climbed a tree, every time we went sliding down a gully to see what was at the bottom, or followed the river, or shone a torch into a hole in the ground, it was all looking for this place. For him. It was in our blood all along. I closed my eyes. That was always you, Em. Never me. I only went along with it to keep you safe. Then why not do the same thing now? Come with me, Anna. Come home. I've missed you so much. Please, come on, just let me in. God, it sounded so much like her. So much. But underneath everything she said was a click, 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 which I realized was her nails. She was tapping those wickedly sharp, inky black nails on the door as she spoke, and the thought made me feel sick. When I didn't reply, she sighed heavily, her patented, "My big sister's such a nerd" sigh. Fine, you can wait a while. He'll be here before too long, and let's see you say no then. Who'll be here? I said, too loud, panicking. I thought she knew Bass was coming, that she was going to force me to kill him or something, like she did with Jim. Turns out it was worse than that, though. Because, of course it was. Him, she said, chuckling. Haven't you noticed the stones? What? Oh, of course you've been away. Well, have a look out the back. The master bedroom has dual aspect windows. One side faces out over the rear veranda, the other over the turning circle out front. I looked out the back, in time to see a cluster of what appeared to be twisted, misshapen deer-cougar hybrids rolling out one of the boundary stones away. I was about to ask Emily how they did it, when I saw it step out from the tree line, contemplating the circle. It raised its eyes to my window, its luminous, fog-grey eyes, and then, slowly, deliberately, it stepped over the boundary. I started screaming. Emily was pounding on the door, yelling that I had to calm down, that everything was going to be okay. And right then, from the front of the cabin, I heard the screech of tires, followed by a car horn blaring. No, Emily shrieked. No, Anna, don't do this, just listen to me. I'm sorry, Em, I said. I wasn't sorry. I snagged up the stool that went with the dressing table and hurled it through the front window, even as the chorus of inhuman yowling went up from the back of the house, and from the other side of the bedroom door, which by now was jumping in its frame, starting to splinter. I didn't hesitate. I just went with whatever cliched action movie bullshit was running through my mind at that point. I grabbed the window frame and just straight vaulted through it, not even noticing the shards of glass that embedded themselves in my forearms. All I saw as I flew through was the door smashing open behind me and the blessed sight of Bass's truck below me. I landed on the porch roof and from there hurled myself into the flatbed, screaming for an utterly bewildered Bass to start driving immediately. He didn't need telling twice. As he hurtled down the road, I opened the window between the cab and the bed and slithered through, landing gracelessly in the passenger seat. What the fuck was that? The big thing with antlers coming around from the back of the house? I think he's my new brother-in-law. He didn't answer, just drove faster. Thank God he knew that road as well as he did. He took every corner practically on two wheels, but he hit them all perfectly. It was like being in a rally car, flying along so fast everything outside was just a blur. No wonder Bass had made it to the cabin sooner than I'd expected. As time went on, though, we both calmed down slightly. Not great for me, since the drop in adrenaline meant I was really feeling the glass in my arms. We'd been on the road for over an hour with no sign of anything untoward, when he allowed himself to ease off the gas, just a little. We should have known, really. Barely 5 minutes after, he gave a shaky laugh and told me we were going to make it. I noticed him repeatedly glancing in the rearview mirror. The truck was speeding up again, so fast it started shaking. "Something coming up behind us," he said through gritted teeth when I asked. I turned to look behind us, expecting Emily to have commandeered my rental car or something. But instead, I saw him, that furry fucking abomination, sprinting along the road behind us on all fours. He was coming up on us impossibly fast, tongue lolling, foggy eyes fixed on me. I was about to say something, maybe to suggest throwing me out so he could save himself. Especially since even though I'd seen Emily for what she really was now, and even though that had broken most of the spell keeping me there, I still had an awful gut feeling about leaving the place. Before I could get a word out, though, Bass screamed and wrenched the wheel so hard I smacked my head on the window. I faced forwards in time to see Cassie, Emily's best friend and Bass's youngest cousin, standing in the middle of the road. I know why Bass swerved, because at first glance she must have looked exactly like she always did. But I knew better. One look at her eyes and I knew better. I tried yanking the steering wheel back to straighten us out, even if it meant running her over. That turned out to be the worst idea of many, because I'm pretty sure that's what rolled us. The next thing I knew, I was upside down in the truck, the seatbelt pressing into what later turned out to be a broken collarbone. I went for the seatbelt release, dumping myself headfirst onto the roof of the cab, and sending pain shooting through every inch of me, pain so bad that for a moment I forgot where I was or why I was there. In a pretty rude reminder, the door beside me was literally ripped off its hinges, landing some 20 feet back up the road. I screamed and tried to crawl under Bass to the other door, only for a huge clawed hand, covered in bristly mouse-brown fur, to close around my throat. As it inexorably drew me outside, it started whispering to me. I couldn't make out any specific words, but the overall intention came through clear enough. "Come home." Then there was a crack, so loud I had to cover my ears. The hand released me and I heard an horrific scream. The only way I can describe it is if a man and a cougar had fallen off a cliff while fighting, and they both realized they were going to die at the same time. A mindless shriek of rage and pain which you heard and felt inside your head at the same time. It faded into the distance and was gone. I lay there for a while, staring up at the floorboards of the truck, as a man appeared over me and started demanding to know if we were okay. I smiled at that because I knew I was never going to be okay again. I'd like to go back to Wales now, I said, and then blacked out. The next thing I knew was waking up in hospital, plugged up to every machine going, including my new best friend, the morphine drip. Total tally for my little trip turned out to be a broken arm, ulnar and radial, wrist and collarbone, 2 broken ankles, whiplash, 4 extremely deep lacerations to my forearms, a bruised larynx, ruptured eardrum, and too many cuts and bruises to count, many of which were infected. They also told me falling off the bank onto my water bottle had traumatized my kidney. No shit, Doc. Rest me too, thanks. Worse than any of that, though, my parents are only a few minutes away now. Bass, who was in better shape than me, came to see me as soon as I was awake. He planted this big, over-dramatic kiss on me, in front of the nurses and everything. Scandalous. Then he asked me if I wanted to talk about any of it. I absolutely did not. I did want to know why we were still alive, though. Well, it turns out we'd crashed close enough to town that the woods were only questionably Tovey land, so there was a bunch of people hanging around with guns, because of course they were. Also, technically, I think they were looking for those dead trespassers. Anyway, they heard the crash and came to investigate, and then shot him right in the side of the head. Not that it seemed to slow him down, mind you. All in all, I'm glad I've written this all out, because once I've explained some version of it to the authorities, I don't think I'm ever going to mention a word of it to anyone ever again. I'm staying in touch with Bass, though, obviously. Well, I did what I came out here to do anyway. I found out what happened to Emily. I might not entirely understand what happened to her, but at least I know. And by some miracle, I managed to keep it from happening to me, too. Bass keeps telling me how much of a miracle it was that I got out of there, that I got off the island, all without succumbing to any of the stuff the other guys did. And I get that, I do. Like I said before, I never expected to make it home at all. So to find myself free, alive, back in the world, and more or less in one piece, it's incredible. I just hope that one day, eventually, the whispering in my head will stop. Well, my dear friends, the first story was really popular with you last week, and I did say that if you liked it, I would do the sequel. So there you go. Just as good as the first, I think. That sort of brings it all to a resolution, because I don't think there's any more coming. This was a few years since this was written, so that seems to be it. But I really enjoyed that one, and I hope you did too. That is a long one to start the week off. So, having a break tomorrow, but I'll be back again very soon, my dear friends, alright? So I know you'll join me for the next one. Till then, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.